Wanted to make a video on my new Rock Island Armory VR 60 shotgun, which I took out for the first time today and put 200 rounds through. There were only 3 malfunctions. One was with the first round where I had 5 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, and that first round of federal buckshot didn't quite eject. It just barely got caught on the ejection port. I'm not going to count that against the gun. I had one other failure to eject with a really light federal clay load. I also had a failure to fire with a hard primer on some really oddball turkey loads. So 3 malfunctions total out of 200 rounds, and I really can't blame any of them on the gun. So I think this was a pretty good performance, but there were a few issues, and I'll go over those as well. So I wanted to make a little video of what happened to my bolt assembly after firing 200 rounds through the Rock Island Armory VR 60 with only the light load piston in it, and that's key here. So on the back side of the bolt, you just saw a piece fall off. It came from right here. This left side of this buffer pad, I guess for lack of a better term, just disintegrated. There's the piece falling off. Over on the right, you see the way it's supposed to normally be. And then at the top, it starts to fall apart over here. And it has disintegrated completely on the left side. That's from 200 rounds. Now, about half of those, about 100 of them, were federal double-aught buckshot and a state double-aught buckshot. I left the light piston in place just based on a lot of advice that I had received from people who do own this gun. And now that I'm looking at this, I'm realizing that I probably should have put the heavy piston in for the buckshot use. So now I can work on finding a replacement buffer piece, which looks like it will be replaceable by popping it off right here and popping a new one in. So not a huge deal so long as I can get that replacement part, and that's the question. So I'll have to get a hold of Rock Island Armory and talk to them. So actually, instead of just blaming the buckshot though, I'm going to have to go ahead and put part of the blame on this stuff. Kent's Ultimate Turkey. So here are all of the loads that were used today. Again, these are extremely weak. The weakest shotgun shells I think I've ever fired. And yeah, these barely operate the gun, but still only 1 out of 25 failed to eject, so not bad. This Remington load and this one right here both ran really well. They're nice full power loads that function the gun well, but don't beat the gun up. The buckshot run pretty well. The first round I fired, which I mentioned, did fail to eject. Again, brand new shotgun first round. I'm going to chalk that up to needing some break-in, not the ammo. But that didn't quite eject. But overall, good rounds. These, oh man, these things are abusive. These are crazy rounds. It's almost like they were double charged or something. It was pretty insane. I don't recommend putting these through your gun. I think they're a big part of why my buffer is now destroyed. That and not using the heavy piston as I should have for those. If you do fire these, use the heavy piston for sure. These are the sweet spot right here. Like I said earlier, great ammo, perfect for this gun. They run like butter through the gun. They're so smooth. These will be my carry loads right now, my home defense loads, until I prove that 3-inch Magnum buckshot will feed through the magazines as well as the 2 3/4 does. So at any rate, there's the ammo that went into the testing, 200 rounds total. Overall, this is an outstanding shotgun. I can't criticize Rock Island Armory or the manufacturer, Arms Corps, for the trashed buffer. They did supply a heavy load piston, which I did not use, And in retrospect, now I know if I'm going to fire really heavy loads, I need to put that heavy piston in there. And then, go back to the light piston for target loads, or even for home defense with heavy loads. It's going to operate. That won't be a problem. And the least of your worries will be damaging a buffer if you ever need to use the gun in a home defense situation. So not really a worry there. I would say heavy piston for the really heavy loads. Everything else you could probably leave the light piston in. Again, I do think the turkey loads that I used, believe it or not, were probably the main culprit with the damaged buffer. Definitely should have been using the heavy piston with that, and I didn't. So that's my fault. And now the gun's gonna sit until I get that new buffer. But that's on me. The gun itself's very reliable, and that's something I wanted to cover. Out of the 200 rounds, there was one failure to fire on one of those turkey loads, which had extremely hard primers. It just didn't whack the primer hard enough with that hard primer for it to ignite, and I tossed the round. That was 1 out of 200 rounds, and it was only on those turkey loads where I ran into that. All the other primers fired properly with one whack from the firing pin, so I'm not going to blame the gun for that one. Those loads were really incredibly powerful, hard-hitting loads, and I would never put them through my gun again in any case. The other failures, so there were 2 others. I had a failure to eject on the very first round. That was Federal double-aught premium buckshot, fully loaded 5-round magazine with 1 in the chamber. When I touched the first round off, it almost ejected, but just barely caught on the edge of the plastic husk and didn't quite go out. That was the first round out of the gun, so I'm not going to blame the gun for that. That's shotgun, first round hung up, ejecting. Not really a big deal. I'm not concerned about it. The other malfunction was with the Federal Grand competition clay target loads. This is a very, very, very light load. Very light load. So again, I'm not going to blame the gun for that. It just straight out didn't eject. It went back into the chamber. So, these things were so weak that some of them literally fell out of the ejection port after firing onto the ground at my feet. That's how weak these were. The more powerful loads ejected 15, 20, 25, 30 feet in the case of the turkey loads. These were falling out of the gun, and it was actually laughable. I felt like almost shooting a 22 or something. Not really recommended for this gun, although I will say, other than the one failure to eject, the others ejected, and they functioned. Even with this light of a load, the gun still functioned. So I think that probably speaks to the fact that you really, really need the heavy piston for truly heavy loads. I would recommend for any owner of the VR60 to go ahead and order at least 1 bag of these O-rings. And every time you clean your gun, for how cheap they are, just replace the O-ring, right? Put a new O-ring in with some gun grease on it. I use the Slide Glide. Stick new O-rings. You need 3 each time. 2 in the gas block and 1 in the piston. Probably, I don't know, what, a buck worth of O-rings every time you clean your gun? So what? Worth doing? You got brand new O-rings in there every time. The 9-round magazine, flawless. None of the malfunctions happened with the 9-round. And again, you can't really blame the gun, I don't think, for any of them. But for the record, they did happen on the 5-round mags. This is the one that will be loaded up for home defense once I get this gun repaired with a new buffer and get it going again. I do trust it with my life. I think it's that reliable of a gun with the right load. The best load for this gun has turned out to be the Estate buckshot. And there you can see the box. These are fairly hard hitting, but not nearly as much as the turkey loads were. These were not abusive. They were just good solid loads. Running these through the gun, you could just feel the smoothness. I mean, these really, really work perfectly in this gun. It runs like clockwork on these. It runs so darn good, I'm going to use these for my defense loads. 75 through, no malfunctions. Every single round was smooth functioning. And double up back should pretty much stop anything you need to stop coming through your front door. I have double lot 3-inch Magnum Remington buckshot, but I didn't fire any 3-inch rounds through this gun. And for all I know, they may not feed as well through the magazine as the 2 3/4. I don't know. So until I can prove that, those 3-inch rounds are going to stay on a shelf, and these are going to be my carry loads because I know they work really, really well. And I know double aught buckshot will definitely do the job for home defense. So one of the first things that happened when I initially disassembled and reassembled the gun was that I managed to trash the O-ring inside of the piston, putting it back together a little bit too carelessly, rushing in a little too much. And I managed to trash the one O-ring that they included in the 2 grooves that are in here. And that's interesting because there are 2 grooves that are identical, and they're both made to have the O-ring, apparently. You can see the 2 O-rings I've replaced. On the O-rings that I'm putting in, the new ones, they're perfect. They look great. I'm going to put some Slide Glide on them. Slide Glide is a very thick grease that stays on things under hard use, even with high temperatures. Use it on the slide rails of my handguns. And it's a nice thick grease to use for the O-rings. Now we see the 2 grooves. I'm going to put the O-rings in. There's the first O-ring, and you see we have another groove. And now both O-rings are in place. Brand new O-rings. It's better to just, I think, buy a bag for $10 and have a bag and replace them after a large amount of shooting. Why not, right? They're cheap. Kill it. On the tube that the recoil spring rides on, I decided to polish that with 2000 grit sandpaper all the way from end to end, and put a tiny bit of a chamfer on this edge so that the O-rings initially slide over on reassembly. But keeping this tube really well polished, cleaned, and lubed. And again, I like to use the Slide Glide, but different people use gun grease. Anything that'll stay on there for 100 or 200 rounds, which this stuff did. It was very much still on there after 200 rounds. Will take care of things. So polish it Put some thick lube on there. Everything's nice and clean. So one thing I did want to share a tip on is loading ammo into the magazines. First one's easy, but as you go on loading them progressively, they're going to get harder and harder, and what happens is the rim catches on the brass of the shell below it. Now you can kind of wiggle it and force it in. Some types of rounds go in more easily than others, but you're going to run into some that just don't want to go over that lip. So what you can do is take a blunt plastic object. Do not use metal objects. Do not use sharp objects. There's a primer in there. If you hit that primer, the shell could detonate. You don't want to do that. So you want a blunt plastic object to reach in there and force down while you're putting shells in. I've done a couple of things with this gun that I think are going to be great for home defense. I have the Streamlight ProTac Rail Mount 1 with the Arasaka mount for Picatinny. That holds it up high, and it's a real good quality mount. That did not loosen or move in the 200 rounds I fired today. This here is the SIG Romeo 5. Flip the gun over. Give you a look at that. This is a great optic. I use it on my AR, and it holds zero really well. The dot is as bright as you need it to be, or as small and dim as you need it to be, depending on what you're trying to do. This one, once I got it zeroed with buckshot early on, held the zero through the entire session, no problems there. After the 200 rounds, I needed to very slightly snug the mounting screw. I'll probably go ahead and put Loctite on at this point, now that I know it's where I want it to be. The eye relief is very good. It's very easy and quick to acquire the dot. Everything works well, so once that Loctite's on there, I won't have to worry about snugging the screw anymore. So the bottom line on this gun is that it is overall quite reliable with the right loads, and I recommend buckshot. The 2 3/4 estate buckshot, if you can find it, great stuff. Runs like clockwork through this gun. It's an awesome defense load, everyone knows that. 10 rounds of double-aught buck in this gun is probably the most formidable home defense weapon you can possibly possess, period, end of story, as far as I'm concerned. Go out and get one. They're cheap. They're worth every dollar. And just remember to change that piston out to heavy if you're going to shoot really heavy loads. Get an extra bag of the O-rings like I recommended, and change them out when you clean your gun. It's cheap insurance. As soon as I get that buffer replaced, which again I think is almost entirely my fault, this is going to be an amazing gun, and I'm so glad about it.